Team connection proper. Okay, let's start the session now. Okay, so welcome back, my dear students. So today what we are going to cover is the actual GST, right? In the past two sessions what we have studied is we have just understood the background of the GST कि macro level पे government level पे GST क्या बोलता है, correct है? Now we will quickly revise what we have done in the previous session and then we will move on to the most important and one of my favorite topics, that is supply का topic, right? अगर आप सप्लाई समझ गए तो आधा जीएसटी आपका वहीं पे खत्म हो जाएगा. Clear everybody? So let us just quickly recap what we have done in the previous session and then we will move on to understand the concept of supply. Right? So previous session में हमने ये देखा था that in the indirect taxes, tax is levied on what? Goods or services. Now उसके बाद हमने जब कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन पढ़ा था, in that constitution we saw that this indirect taxes के अंदर एक tax है which is called as GST. This GST is nothing but it is a tax which is levied on सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज. करेक्ट है? तो यहां पे एडिशनल वर्ड क्या आ गया? सप्लाई. करेक्ट. सो पहला गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज तो हर एक इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स के लिए कॉमन है, बट यहां पे जब मैं जीएसटी की बात करता हूं, इट इज अ टैक्स विच इज लेविड ऑन सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज. करेक्ट. दैट मीन्स दिस सप्लाई इज योर इवेंट, टैक्सेबल इवेंट और अ ट्रिगरिंग इवेंट जिसके वजह से ये जीएसटी का GST implication will start flowing. Correct? So before getting into that, we studied what are goods and what are services. Let us quickly recap what are goods and what are services and then we will move on to understand the concept of supply today. Correct? This supply concept will be very interesting and you guys will love it. I am very much sure about that. तो जब मैं goods की बात करता हूं, goods is defined under section 2 subsection 52 of the act which states, उसके अंदर में देखा था उसका मीनिंग क्या है, उसका एक्सक्लूजन क्या है, उसका इंक्लूजन क्या है. करेक्ट. दैट मीन्स वी सॉ मीनिंग्स अदर देन एन एक्सक्लूजन एंड विच आर एग्रीड टू बी सीवर्ड. राइट. विच आर एग्रीड टू बी सीवर्ड का मतलब वो उसको कैसे मेरे को उसको काट के देना है. राइट. एंड सर्टन सर्कुलर्स आल्सो वी सॉ. करेक्ट. सो इट मीन्स व्हाट? It means every kind of a movable property. That means जब मैं goods की बात करूंगा, that means it is talking only about the movable property. Now other than what, मतलब वो movable तो होंगे but उसके अलावा, that means movable के अंदर कुछ exclusion है. What are those exclusion we saw? That means the two exclusions under movable are nothing but the money and securities. Correct? Money and securities, whether it is movable goods but still it is not considered in the definition of goods. Correct है? ये जो पैसे में दूंगा वो मूव हो रहा है one person to another person. Correct? But still this is a movable property but still this is excluded from the definition of goods per se is what we have seen. Similarly securities like shares, bond, debentures, वो भी जितने movable property हैं but they are also excluded from the definition of goods. Correct? Then we saw कि money का मतलब क्या होता है. Money means any kind of money, means Indian legal tender, foreign currency, check, promissory note, bill of exchange, any name you give, any color you give. Correct? Money is money and that becomes what? That is excluded from the definition of your goods. Securities का मतलब क्या हो गया? That means shares, stocks, bond, debenture, mutual fund, government securities, rights, interest in security, anything related to security, उसको हम बोलेंगे those are securities and those securities are also excluded from the definition of goods. ये हमने देखा था. Correct? So that means goods is a movable property. Movable property में से दो चीज को निकाल दिया है, that is money and securities. Right? But it includes what? मतलब जब यहां बट इंक्लूड्स की बात आ रहा है, मतलब वो मूवेबल नहीं होगा, बट इंक्लूड्स व्हाट? इट इंक्लूड्स एक्शनेबल क्लेम. दैट मींस दोज क्लेम्स जिसको मैं एक्शनेबल बना सकता हूं. राइट. अगर मैं क्लेम करूंगा तो उस पर एक्शन ले सकता हूं. ग्रोइंग क्रॉप्स, ग्रास एंड एनीथिंग अटैच्ड टू और फॉर्मिंग पार्ट ऑफ द लैंड. करेक्ट. एक्शनेबल क्लेम्स का मतलब हमने क्या देखा था? मींस क्लेम टू एन अनसिक्योर्ड डेट. मेरा डेट, मैंने किसी को लोन दिया है. इफ आई वांट टू आस्क दैट मनी, दैट इज आई कैन क्लेम दैट मनी. राइट. दैट इज कॉल्ड एज एक्शनेबल क्लेम. करेक्ट. नाउ सपोज इफ आई अंकित इज गिविंग लोन टू say Mr. B. Correct. Now I have to recover this money from Mr. B. I have a right to recovery. Now this right I am transferring to Mr. C, that Mr. C please recover this from Mr. B. Then that being an actionable claim, it is transferable, and this is going to be called as goods का definition के अंदर. Clear everybody? That means actionable claim के अंदर क्या आएगा? Means a claim to unsecured debt, राइट्स टू रिसीव बेनिफिट और एसेट्स इन फ्यूचर. मैंने कोई लॉटरी का टिकट ले लिया, उस पर मेरे को राइट है, अगर वो उसका कुछ भी मेरे को नंबर जो मेरा लॉटरी का टिकट है, if that number comes, then I have the right to receive the benefit or asset in the future. That can be like what? That can be something like your contingent event है. करेक्ट है? इट इज नॉट श्योर कि जो लॉटरी टिकट है उसके पर अगर मेरे को मिलने ही वाला है. करेक्ट? दैट मीन्स जो एक्शनेबल क्लेम है लॉटरी टिकट्स बोल दो, दैट इज समथिंग अ राइट टू रिसीव द बेनिफिट और एसेट इन द फ्यूचर. एग्जाम्पल कैन बी बेटिंग, गैम्बलिंग, लॉटरी, इंश्योरेंस क्लेम्स, right to recover the arrears of rents, right? I have not received the rent for 3 months से 50,000 rupees, तो उसको रिकवर करने का राइट है मेरे पास. करेक्ट? That is, these rights are also included in the definition of goods. Then we saw growing crops. जो crops जमीन से लग के grow हो रहे हैं, that means grapes, wheat, sugarcane, etc. These are also included in the definition of goods, right? है हम यहाँ पे goods का definition समझ रहे हैं. We are not अंडरस्टैंडिंग और थिंकिंग कि ये टैक्सेबल है या नहीं टैक्सेबल. करेक्ट? पहले तो हम ये समझ रहे हैं कि वेदर दीज आर क्लासिफाइड एज गुड्स और नॉट, बिकॉज अगर वो फर्स्ट स्टेज में गुड्स का ही पैरामीटर क्लियर नहीं करेगा, देन देयर इज नो पॉइंट मूविंग फर्दर वेदर इट इज सप्लाई और नॉट अ सप्लाई. करेक्ट? देन the third thing which is included being an immovable is the grass, right? Grass भी जमीन को लगा हुआ है, generally used as fodder. These are also included in the definition of goods. Correct? That means हमने क्या देखा goods के अंदर? पहला तो मूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी देखा, उसके अंदर में दो एक्सक्लूजन देख लिया, मनी एंड सिक्योरिटीज का. इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी के अंदर हम चार चीज देख रहे हैं, दैट इज एक्शनेबल क्लेम्स, देन ग्रोइंग क्रॉप्स, देन यू हैव ग्रास एंड एनी थिंग्स attached to the land or forming part of the land. Correct है? Anything which is attached to the land or forming part of the land, that can be banyan tree, teak tree, etc. Any kind of trees जो land को attached हैं, right? These are also included in the definition of goods. Now, which are agreed to be severed बिफोर सप्लाई और अंडर अ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट ऑफ सप्लाई. करेक्ट? ये जो ग्रास है, ग्रोइंग क्रॉप्स है, ग्रास है, या थिंग्स विच अटैच्ड टू फॉर्मिंग पार्ट ऑफ द लैंड है, ये क्या है? एग्रीड टू बी सीवर्ड है, राइट? दीज आर एग्रीड टू बी सीवर्ड, मतलब एग्रीड टू बी कट बिफोर सप्लाई और अंडर अ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट ऑफ सप्लाई. करेक्ट? इसको मैं कब काटूंगा क्रॉप्स को? या तो मैं बिफोर सप्लाई काटूंगा, या फिर मैंने कॉन्ट्रैक्ट किया है कि ये मेरे को जितना भी फ्रूट्स इसके अंदर होगा दैट इज योर फ्रूट्स. करेक्ट? दैट मीन्स ग्रोइंग क्रॉप्स, ग्रास और एनीथिंग अटैच्ड टू और फॉर्मिंग पार्ट ऑफ द लैंड का मतलब क्या हो गया? ये जो क्रॉप उगेगा, ये जो ग्रास उगेगा, राइट? दिस ग्रास आई एम गोइंग टू कट. सीवर्ड मीन्स कट. I am going to cut and give it. That means this cutting can be before the supply or under a contract of supply also, right? So these is what is included in the definition of goods. Then we saw certain circular which was a priority sector lending certificate. That was very simple, that there are two banks, right? हर एक बैंक को कोटा दिया गया है कि प्रायोरिटी सेक्टर में इतना लेंडिंग करना है. करेक्ट? सपोज देयर इज वन बैंक, बैंक 1 एंड बैंक 2. करेक्ट? एवरी बैंक हैज बीन टोल्ड दैट आउट ऑफ योर लोन बुक, जितना भी आप लोन टोटल प्रोवाइड करते हो, राइट, आउट ऑफ दैट से 25% इज व्हाट शुड गो टू द प्रायोरिटी सेक्टर. व्हाट इज द प्रायोरिटी सेक्टर इन इंडिया? एग्रीकल्चर. करेक्ट? नाउ सपोज दिस बैंक नंबर 1 हैज एन ब्रांचेस ऑल इन द इंटीरियर विलेजेस, so they have given the loan, and out of the total loans approximately say 40% total loan book is going to the priority sector. Now this second bank which is a urban bank which has branches only in the urban areas, right? So they have given priority sector loan of say 20% only. So this 5% का जो shortfall है, they can take from this in the form of securities. Correct? That is called as priority sector lending certificate, and because of which basically whether these are going to be classified as securities or not, or whether they're going to be classified as goods or not, that is what is important to understand. Correct? So what was there in case of priority sector lending certificate? Priority sector lending certificate क्या बोलता है? These are not securities. Correct? ये खाली goods का trading हो रहा है, इस पे कोई मैं interest नहीं चार्ज कर रहा हूं, इस पे मैं कोई भी चीज एडिशनल नहीं चार्ज कर रहा हूं, राइट? इट इज प्योर ट्रेडिंग, हेंस टैक्सेबल एज गुड्स. नाउ नेचर ऑफ सप्लाई क्या है इसके अंदर? इंटरस्टेट. व्हाई इंटरस्टेट? बिकॉज ये जो प्रायोरिटी सेक्टर लेंडिंग सर्टिफिकेट है ना, इसका ट्रेडिंग कहां पे होता है? आरबीआई का एक वेबसाइट है विच इज कॉल्ड एज कुबेर. When you go on this website, you can see you can trade on the priority sector lending certificate. Now, bank number 1 does not know that which is the bank number 2 which is taking that certificate. Correct? That means I am unaware कि वो जो bank है which is taking the certificate, whether it is in the same state or in the another state. So for that purpose, this has been classified as interstate supply and IGST will be levied. Clear everybody? This is what you understood as far as the concept of goods was concerned. Then few important aspects which I wanted to explain you was immovable property. लैंड हो जाएगा immovable property. Benefits to arise out of land. लैंड के साथ साथ जो उससे बेनिफिट अराइज होगा, राइट, दिस इज द लैंड विच आई एम हैविंग, राइट, इसके साथ साथ जो भी बेनिफिट अराइज होगा दैट विल ऑल्सो फॉर्म पार्ट ऑफ द डेफिनेशन ऑफ इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी ओनली. नाउ व्हाट कैन बी द बेनिफिट्स? लाइक दे कैन बी टीडीआर राइट्स, राइट्स टू वेज, फिशरी राइट्स, राइट टू कलेक्ट ड्यूज फ्रॉम द फेयर और मार्केट ऑन द लैंड. करेक्ट. दैट मीन्स क्या हो गया, सपोज ये मेरा लैंड है, अंकित का लैंड है, राइट, मिस्टर बी का ये हाउस है और मिस्टर बी का ये ऑफिस है. नाउ मिस्टर बी इज कमिंग टू मी एंड सेइंग, अंकित प्लीज गिव मी अ वे टू गो टू माय ऑफिस फ्रॉम हियर बिकॉज अदरवाइज आई हैव टू गो दिस वे एंड गो. करेक्ट. सो आई एम गिविंग हिम अ वे एंड फॉर दिस वे ही इज गिविंग मी सम रेवेन्यू, राइट, टू वेज, राइट. Or there is a pond in my land and somebody is asking me that he wants to do fishing in the land, right? I am giving him the fishery right. Ki, okay, Baba, you do the fishing on this particular land. Whatever you want to do, you can take out the fish and take it. Just give me a monthly rental. So that is called as benefit arise out of land. Now these benefits which is arising out of land is also defined in the definition of immovable property only. Now things, थर्ड थिंग व्हाट इज इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी के अंदर हम देखेंगे थिंग्स अटैच टू द अर्थ. थिंग्स अटैच टू द अर्थ हमको पता है क्या क्या हो सकते हैं. दैट मीन्स रूटेड इन द अर्थ लाइक ट्रीज, एम्बेडेड इन द अर्थ लाइक बिल्डिंग, वॉल, फ्लैट, सीमेंट फैक्ट्री एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा, राइट. इसका मतलब क्या हो गया, ये लैंड है मेरा, इसके अंदर जो मैंने रूटेड है उसके अंदर जो गड़ा हुआ है, राइट, दैट मीन जो ट्रीज हैं उसके रूट्स लैंड के अंदर तक होते हैं. बिल्डिंग है उसका जो बेस होता है दैट इज इनसाइड द लैंड, करेक्ट, इज रूटेड इनसाइड द लैंड, एम्बेडेड इन द अर्थ, करेक्ट. दीज बिल्डिंग्स or the trees or cement factories, everything which is going deep inside the land is also called as what? Immovable properties. Correct hai? That means even the buildings, even the flats in the building will be called as immovable property only. Correct everybody? Now things permanently fastened to or anything attached to the earth. That means यहां पे क्या बोलता है वो, दैट मीन्स यहां पे वॉट एवर इज परमानेंटली फास्टेंड टू और अटैच टू द अर्थ, राइट, मीन्स अगर मेरे पास ये लैंड है, इसके ऊपर मैंने क्या किया, इसके ऊपर मैंने कोई टेलीकॉम का टावर लगा दिया, राइट, दीज आर परमानेंटली फास्टेंड, उसको स्क्रू से डाला गया, करेक्ट है, दे हैव बीन इंस्टॉल्ड ऑन द लैंड, देन दे आर परमानेंटली इंस्टॉल्ड, देन दीज गुड्स विल ऑल्सो बी कॉल्ड एज योर इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी. करेक्ट है. सिमिलरली lift, when I'm buying the lift from the lift supplier, that is called as an immovable property, but once that lift is fixed into the building, that means वो बिल्डिंग जो अटैच्ड है अर्थ के ऊपर, उसके ऊपर कोई चीज को मैंने इंस्टॉल कर दिया, then that lift also becomes my immovable property. Clear everybody? Right, that is what we saw as far as the immovable property was concerned. Then what do you mean by actionable claim? We have already seen actionable claim का मतलब क्या होता है, but only the lottery, gambling and betting have been included in the scope of supply. जब मैं scope of supply के बारे में देखूंगा, ये हम बाद में डिस्कस करेंगे. when we will be discussing about the scope of supply, then we will see that out of this actionable claims, they are included in the definition of goods, but whether they fall in the definition of scope of supply or not, that we will be seeing afterward. As of now, just for your reference, only lottery, gambling and betting have been included in the scope of supply. Other actionable claims are out of the scope of supply. So this is what we have studied as far as your concept of goods was concerned, right? Then we saw the concept of supply services, correct? Let us go and see quickly the concept of services also, so that we are through with the previous session and then we move on to the supply of goods and services, right? So under services, what we saw, section 2 subsection 102 explained us again meaning of service, right? So यहाँ पे हमने देख रहे हैं means क्या है, other than क्या है and inclusion क्या है, right? What do you mean by services? What do you mean by services? Anything. That means anything other than goods. Anything other than goods, right? That means जो goods के definition में नहीं आएगा उसको मैं क्या बोलूंगा, सर्विस बोल दूंगा. इट कैन बी एनीथिंग, राइट, एनीथिंग अदर देन गुड्स इज गोइंग टू बी क्लासिफाइड एज माई सर्विस, करेक्ट. देन अदर देन के अंदर मनी एंड सिक्योरिटीज को भी एक्सक्लूड कर दिया गया. दैट मीन्स दीज मनी एंड सिक्योरिटीज आर नाइदर गुड्स नॉर सर्विसेज, neither goods nor services, correct? Is it clear to you guys? So money and security per se are neither goods nor services. Now why this is neither good nor services? Suppose A has sold goods to B, right? A ने B को goods sold किया, so B will make the payment. B will make the payment. Now, suppose if this A has sold goods to B of say 1000 rupees and on that he has charged 10 rupees, suppose 100 rupees as the GST, then this is coming to 1100 rupees. So this 1100 rupees is being transferred from Mr. B to Mr. A. If this money is also included in the definition of goods or services, then what will happen? Mr. B will say, I am transferring you a movable property, so I will also charge GST on that. So it will become a vicious cycle, right? So money is nothing, but it is a means of payment, right? That is why this has been excluded from the definition of goods as well as from the definition of services. Correct? That is what we have understood as far as this concept of services was concerned, right? But that means till now we have covered meaning of the services as well as other than, that means exclusion of the services, right? But it includes what? It includes what? Matlab, that means it can include something जो exclude हुआ है, right? That means it can, ये inclusion क्यों आएगा? Because कुछ exclude हुआ है, उसमें से कुछ include होगा तभी but includes आएगा, right? Activities relating to the use of money. Correct? That means when I'm using that money and I'm generating more money out of it, those activities relating to use of money is included in the definition of my services. Correct? That means this use of money can be how? Either it can be conversion. That means conversion of money कैसे होगा? That means from one form to another form, right? Or from one denomination to another denomination. Correct? I've seen that I'm converting the cash to INR to USD or USD to INR, and for which or I'm converting 2000 rupees ka notes into 100 rupees ka notes, correct? And for which bank is charging me some money, correct? Now what is happening is this Mr. A is there, he goes to his bank and he says, sir, please I have 2000 rupees ka notes, please exchange this notes and give me 100 rupees ka notes into how many notes? 20 notes, correct? Now if the bank is charging say 50 rupees for this particular transaction, then this transaction of converting is called as service, right? But not this rupees is called as service, not this rupees is called as service, correct? This money is not called as service, but the activity of converting the money or changing the denomination for which the bank is charging me separately or for which anybody else is charging me separately, that is included in the definition of services. Clear, everybody? Anything relating to use of money is basically considered as service, provided there's a separate charge which has been consideration which has been charged. Clear? Explanation is there. Now what happened was initially the definition was only till here. So यहाँ पे what happened was this goods का other than is sorted out, money का other than is sorted out with this inclusion. Now people from the security market, that is the stock market, stock broker, what they told, my security is neither goods nor services. So whatever services I give is also excluded from the definition of GST. Correct? That means therefore there came an explanation which stated what? Services includes, that means another inclusion has been included, correct? This was inclusion number 1 and this is inclusion number 2. Services include what? It includes facilitating, arranging transaction in the securities, right? Now if I am a person who wants to invest in the stock market, correct? So I open an account with my broker. That broker can be any Kotak Securities or Zerodha, correct? Now this Kotak Securities or Zerodha, they help me buy the securities, correct? So for this they are charging me certain brokerage, they are giving me certain services, right? So buying shares, on that there is no GST, but on the services what they provide, on that particular activity is called as services, and that is included in the service. And then we will see whether this service is taxable or not. That's a different story altogether, correct? Then one more note, as an explanatory note I have added. What is this note? Let us understand this also. Services means anything other than goods, right? We have seen the definition. That means all the immovable property, right? Because those are not goods. Immovable property is not goods. But if it falls within the purview of services as per section 2102, correct? But it will fall within the purview of services, correct? This immovable property, these are not goods, right? So it fulfills this criteria. Services means anything other than goods, right? any transaction in the immovable property can be termed as services, right? Now, any transaction which is happening in the property, that means I'm giving it on lease, I'm giving it on rental, whatever it may be, those can be termed as services. Correct, everybody? Activities relating to use of money, we've already seen conversion, right? Conversion and either into the conversion or services. That means money, this not money per se is not a service, but activity relating to use of money is a service. Correct? Now, suppose if I am giving you loan, correct? I am lending money to Mr. B and I am receiving interest, right? So what is happening here is that Mr. A is giving money to Mr. B. Now, Mr. A is giving money to Mr. B and Mr. B has to make the payment of interest, right? So this particular service, this particular activity is called as service. So here what is happening is that I am using my money to generate more money. That means this is an activity relating to the use of money, correct? And this particular thing is basically nothing but ये जब आप देखोगे सर्विस है, but this is exempted as per entry number 27, correct? So this we will understand once we go with the exemption aspects, correct? Then example of conversion. What do you mean by conversion? We have already seen conversion can be either of notes or for the currency denominator, correct? That is what we have to see. Then securities are neither goods nor services. We have seen that stockbroker charges a commission, brokerage charges, portfolio maintenance charges, investment charges, demat charges. Those will be classified as services, not the shares per se or not the debentures per se, right? So क्या transaction होगा services जो वो charge कर रहा है over and above that for his services, for his providing this platform for facilitating you to buy securities, that is called a service and not the shares per se, correct? Is it clear to you guys? So till now what we have covered is the concept of goods and services. Now let us jump into the other part of the definition. Now we have seen GST means what? That means it is levied on supply of goods and services. So we have first finished what is the concept of goods and services. Now we will start with the concept of supply. So let us be very focused. Please minutely understand each and every word of supply. Once you understand the concept of supply, everything will become so crystal clear to you, and then you can start linking all the provisions that why this has happened, why this has not happened, correct? So let us go and see the concept of supply now. I hope you guys are ready, right? Take a deep breath and let us go and see the concept of supply now. Now, what is the concept of supply? So we will decode the term supply today. We will break the term supply into various pieces so we understand each and every piece of the term called supply, correct? So supply means what? Supply means scope of supply. That is a taxable event, right? हमको ये पता है कि taxable event क्या है? Supply है, correct? So what we are trying to understand in section 7 is scope of supply. Supply किस किस चीजों को बोला जाएगा, correct? So as per the definition, GST is what? Tax levied on goods and services on supply. Now we have seen the definition of goods and services. Now supply, ये supply कितना बड़ा है? What is the ambit? What is the scope of supply? That is what we have to understand in section 7. Once you understand the scope of supply, then you know कि ये सारी activities supply के अंदर fall करेगी, right? That means मेरा checklist जब बनेगा तो first my checklist is whether it is goods and services, yes. Whether it is supply, yes. अगर ये supply भी fulfill होगा then only I will move forward, otherwise I will not move forward. Clear to you guys? Is it clear? So that means scope of supply, that is the taxable event, is what we are trying to understand now in the section 7. Clear everybody? So scope of supply, that is taxable event. What do you understand by this? We will go and understand. Then we have something called as taxability of composite and mixed supply also, right? So first let us go and decode section 7 and then we will decode section 8 as well. Clear? So section 7 के अंदर when we go, we see there are 4 subsections. Subsection 1 is subsection 7. 1 talks about inclusion. It is inclusive definition. That means it is not just restricted to what is mentioned in the definition, but it is an inclusive definition. Clear everybody? So section 7.1 is an inclusive definition. जब मैं inclusive definition की बात करता हूँ, that means whenever you will read an inclusive definition, you will see list of certain items. But it is not just restricted to those activity or those items only, right? So it is just an example which is given under the inclusive definition, correct? So first we will see that supply will include what all things. once we understand that these activities or these things are called as supply, then we will see whether this supply is of goods or of services, correct? Because we know the taxable event is what? Supply of goods or supply of services. So which section will tell us whether it is supply of goods or services? Section 7(1)(a). This will help us identify whether the supply is of goods or of services. Clear, everybody? So once we understand that this particular activity, what is happening is supply, then we jump to section 7(1)(a), which explains us that whether this activity is supply of goods or services or not. Then we will see what is the exclusion, right? Whenever we see that there's some definition, we see an inclusion, we see exclusion, we see exceptions, right? So what are the things which are excluded from the scope of supply is also what we will be seeing. And section 7(3), what does it states is that government, on the recommendation of the council, they can take certain action where they will say that this particular activity, right, is generally called a supply of goods, but they can change it in the form that this will not be called a supply of goods, but that will be called a supply of services, right? So this is what is there in the scope of supply, correct? So what is there in scope of supply? Let us quickly see once again. So scope of supply का मतलब क्या हो गया? We are trying to decode the taxable event now. कि ये event होगा, then only the GST trigger will happen, then only I will move ahead in the GST. Otherwise, I am not moving ahead in the GST. Tata bye bye, see you, Jai Shri Ram, right? Then there is what we have to understand. Now, what is the scope of supply? That is, it includes what? And once I know that this particular activity is included in the scope of supply, whether this supply is supply of goods or supply of service, this is given as per section 7(1)(a), right? Then we will see what are the activities which are excluded, correct? So 7(1), 7(2) and 7(1)(a). That has to be read in line together, right? So either it can be included or it can be excluded. If it is included, then whether it is supply of goods or supply of services, that is what we have to identify. Clear, everybody? So what do you mean by includes? It includes ka matlab activities to be considered as supply, right? That means what does section 7(1) includes? Those activities which will be considered as supply, correct? If for consideration or without consideration, right? So there can be activities, suppose if I am taking classes or if I am giving certain training, so I can charge fees or I can give without fees also, right? So यहाँ पे what I'm doing is I'm giving training, correct? So activity is what? Training. Now this training, whether it is for consideration or without consideration, is further bifurcated, correct? So any activities, whether it is for consideration or without consideration, we have to further drill down that if I'm taking the classes and if I'm charging something, then it is possible that it will be called a supply. Or if I'm not charging something, then also it is possible that it is called a supply. So what are the scenarios under which this supply will be called as, this activity will be classified under the scope of supply, correct? So what we are trying to understand here is that section 7(1) includes the activities. It is an adjective, correct? We will see what are the activities, कौन सी actions हैं जिसको हम supply बोलेंगे, right? So these activities to be considered as supply. Now these activities or these actions or these adjectives can be either for consideration or without consideration, correct? Now what do you mean by without consideration? So whenever we have something without consideration, suppose if I am a faculty, if I am training somebody, correct? Suppose if I am training say 100 students, out of that there are 3 students who are my relatives. I am not charging fees to them, correct? Now what is happening is that, so for 97 people I am charging consideration, for 3 people I am not charging consideration. So in that scenario, whether this training which I am giving to 3 people, will this be classified as supply or not? For that there is a separate list that has been prepared, that is called as schedule number 1, correct? So whenever you have something without consideration, that means you have to check the activity number, schedule number 1. If that activity is there in schedule number 1, then it is a supply, otherwise it is not a supply, correct? So whenever, simple logic, whenever anything is without consideration, you go to schedule number 1, and in schedule number 1, if your activity is listed, then it is supply, otherwise it is not a supply, correct? Then section 7(1)(a), what does 7(1)(a) will explain us, right? So 7(1)(a) we have already seen. For that 7(1)(a), whether this supply, what if identified under section 7(1), whether this supply will be called a supply of goods or supply of services is what schedule number 2 will explain us. Clear, everybody? Right? Now what does it excludes? I'm so sorry. 7.2 says neither supply of goods nor supply of services, right? There can be certain activities which is classified neither as supply of goods nor as supply of services. So what are those activities is mentioned under section 7.2a. Clear everybody? So 7.2a explains neither supply of goods nor supply of services. So schedule 3 is basically giving you a negative list. So we have seen 3 schedules. Schedule number 1 which talks about the supply, that is the activities for which no consideration has been charged, whether that will be included in the concept of supply or not is given under schedule number 1. If that activity is falling in schedule number 1 and if it is without consideration, then it will fall under the scope of supply. Schedule number 2 explains us that the supply which we have identified in section 7.1, as per 7.1, this activity is called as supply. So whether this supply is supply of goods or supply of services, right? Suppose if I'm going to a restaurant and I'm going to eat food, right? So while eating food, they're going to serve me food as well as they're going to serve me. So it is supply of goods as well as supply of services. In the previous regime, what used to happen was there was a mixed situation. There was a combination of goods as well as service tax to be applied, right? VAT was also applicable and service tax was also applicable. But because of GST, all those taxes got subsumed. So abhi ek hi tax lagne wala, right? So this tax, whether this is tax on supply of goods or tax on supply of services, is mentioned in schedule number 2. Clear everybody? Is it clear till here? Now 7.2a we have seen schedule number 3 which gives a negative list. That means these are the activities or these are the list of activities which will not be classified as supply of goods nor be classified as supply of services, right? So that means they are specifically excluded from the scope of supply, and once it is excluded from the scope of supply, that means there is no need to go further. We know that, correct? 7.2b explains us activities undertaken by. Activities undertaken by what? Central government, state government or local authority, right? So if there's any activity which is taken by the central government, state government or local authority, those will also be excluded. We will go in detail of these sections also. What we're just trying to understand is the framework of section 7. What are the different pieces of section 7? पहला चीज हमको ये देखना है कि whether ये supply के अंदर fall होता है कि नहीं होता है. अगर वो सप्लाई के अंदर फॉल होता है, then whether it is for consideration or without consideration. If it is without consideration, I have schedule number 1 to refer. Now, once I have identified that if this particular activity, whether with consideration or without consideration, is falling under the scope of supply as per section 7.1, then I go to 7.1a, which said that you have identified this activity is supply, but the activity either it is supply of goods or supply of service is specified by section 7.1a. That means in that 7.1a there is a schedule which states that these all activities will be classified as supply of goods or supply of services, correct? Then we have section 7.2 which tells us that there are certain activity which will not be classified as supply of goods nor be classified as supply of services. That is called as negative list, schedule number 3. And 7.2b also explains activities undertaken by central government, state government or local authority which is specifically excluding the transaction from the scope of supply. Is it clear till here? Then we move on to section 7.3 as per this section scope of supply is concerned. That means यहाँ तक मैंने सब समझ लिया कि ये supply है, supply of goods है, सब excluded नहीं है. I have come to a conclusion that this particular activity is supply and a supply of goods है. Correct? Now, the government on the recommendation of council, right, the GST council, they may notify the transactions. What transactions? That whether this particular activity which is generally classified as supply of goods and not classified as supply of services, right? So they can change. That means if it states that is supply of goods and it is not supply of services, or they can say that this particular transaction is supply of services or not supply of goods, correct? So 7.1a के साथ वो simultaneously जाएगा where the government feels that this particular transaction should be dealt like supply of goods and not supply of services, or this particular transaction can be dealt with supply of services and not like supply of goods. Clear everybody? So government can notify, and by notification they can say that this particular transaction will henceforth be classified as supply of services and not supply of goods, right? So this is what is the scope of supply. So जब तक मैं scope of supply समझता नहीं हूँ, I cannot move further under GST, right? So first thing what we understood is the concept of goods. Then we understood the concept of services. Now we are understanding the concept of scope of supply. The moment we understand scope of supply, half of the activity is done. Clear everybody? Then while we are doing supply, We have section number 8 also. I'll just touch up on section number 8. I'll not be giving you in detail. We'll come back to the slide again and go into this bifurcation. So section 8 क्या बोलता है? Taxability of composite supply and mixed supply, right? So there can be situation where I'm giving the supply of goods as well as services, right? Like I told you about the restaurant services, like I told you about training services, I'm giving you training as well as books. There or a works contract service जहाँ पे there is combination of both supply of goods as well as supply of services. So how do you do the taxability of that? Whether they will be taxed as supply of goods or they will be taxed as supply of services is given under section number 8. Correct, everybody? Is it clear to you guys? Correct. So that is what is given in section number 8. So now let us go and bifurcate this section 7.1, 7.1a, 7.2 and 7.3, and then we will go to section number 8. Clear, everybody? I hope you guys are understanding. I hope you guys are able to relate what we are trying to talk. Correct, everybody? So now let us go and jump to section 7.1. So section 7.1 says includes, right? We have seen section 7.1 says inclusive activities to be considered as supply. Whenever I'm talking about activities, it is nothing but it is an adjective, right? So this is an adjective. So this activity is adjective. That means कोई ना कोई action हो रहा होगा. Correct? So this particular section 7.1a includes certain activities which is to be considered as supply. Correct? So what are those activities which are to be considered as supply? Let us go and see those activities now. So activities to be considered as supply, either it can be for consideration or it can be without consideration. Correct? We are revising what we've done in the previous slide, right? So activities to be considered as supply if for consideration or without consideration, both the things, right? That means if I'm doing for a consideration, that means 7.1a, all forms of supply. Forms का मतलब क्या हो गया? Activities, correct? This forms means activities. All forms of supply. That means what? That means activities का मतलब क्या हो गया? Activities can be either sale, it can be either transfer, it can be either barter, or it can be either exchange, right? That means I'm selling something, I'm transferring something, I'm bartering something, I'm exchanging something, correct? Or it can be licensing something, renting something, or leasing something, or it can be disposal. So all these are activities, correct? ये सारे adjective हैं, सारे actionable words हैं, right? I'm selling something, I'm transferring something, I'm bartering something, I'm exchanging something, I'm giving you a license for something, I'm renting something, I'm leasing something, I'm disposing something, correct? So all forms of activities, which is either can be sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease or disposal of goods and services or both. करेक्ट है. दैट कैन बी आइदर गुड्स और सर्विसेज और बोथ. दैट मीन्स मेरे पास कोई गुड्स है उसको या तो मैंने सोल कर दिया, मेरे पास कोई गुड्स है उसको मैंने ट्रांसफर कर दिया, मेरे पास कोई गुड्स है उसको मैंने बार्टर कर दिया, मेरे पास कोई सर्विस उसको मैंने एक्सचेंज कर दिया, मेरे पास कोई सर्विस उसको मैंने लाइसेंस कर दिया, मेरे पास कोई गुड्स है फॉर दैट आई हैव गिवन रेंटल, आई हैव सर्टेन गुड्स फॉर व्हिच आई हैव गिवन लीज. That means either of the activities which I do on these goods and services, correct? Now suppose if I have this mouse in my hand, this is a goods, right? It is a movable property, it falls in the definition of goods, correct? Now we have seen that some activity has to take place as far as this goods is concerned. Now just keeping this goods, can government charge me GST? No. That means I have to sell this goods, I have to transfer this goods, I have to barter this goods, I have to exchange this goods. Unless and until I do some activity on the goods and services, there is no chance that the government can charge GST. Correct hai? That means there has to be certain activity on the particular goods or on services or on both to be called as to be considered as supply. Correct hai? That means activity, all forms of supply of all forms of supply of goods and services are both made or agreed to be made, right? So what I can say is that, okay, I am going to supply to you 1,000 of mouses, right? But you give me in advance. That means I'm agreeing to supply to you, correct? That means I'm agreeing to sell to you. That agreeing मतलब मैं advance भी अगर लेता हूँ, then that is also is considered as activity, considered as supply. Clear, everybody? So once I know that this is a supply is there, then only I will move further in the GST. Otherwise, I will not move further in the GST, right? So there can be situation where somebody says that I have just received advance, I have not transferred the goods. Till now, I have not sold them. I have not sold mouses to you. I have just received advance. But that advance also has been included in the definition of your scope of supply. Clear everybody? Is it clear? So that means advance में भी अगर कुछ आप receive करते हो, agreed to be made, agreed to sell, agreed to transfer, agreed to barter, agreed to exchange, that also will be included in the scope of supply. This agreement, this transfer, this supply should be in the course or furtherance of business. If it is not in the course or furtherance of business, then there's going to be a challenge, correct? So this activity or this transfer should be in the course or furtherance of business. Now, what do you mean by furtherance of business? It can be for any promotional activity. It can be for any expansion activity. That is what is called as by the meaning of furtherance of business. Course of business means मैं routine में अगर कुछ काम करता हूँ, that is called as course of business. Furtherance of business means any kind of promotion or expansion. Clear everybody? Now, of the business. Now, business is defined in section 2, subsection 17. Not important from the point of view of examination, so we are not covering in this crash course. But one point which I need to put it here is that it includes in connection to, right? Any activities in connection to, in connection with, or incidental or ancillary with business will also be covered under the scope of supply. We will be looking into examples, so just wait on. I am just trying to give you the background what we are trying to cover here, correct? Business, example, gold jewelry, motor car. Let us go and see with an example also. This can be business or personal, right? So let me explain with an example so you now you understand. So we have understood that 7.1a क्या बोलता है? 7.1a states all form of supply of goods, correct? All form of supply of goods and services or both. Now, what are the various forms? That is sale. That means if Mr. A is selling something to Mr. B, Mr. A is selling something to Mr. B and Mr. B is giving him money, correct? That means there's a sale, there's a consideration. This is for condition fulfilled. Sale ka condition is fulfilled. And if I'm in the business of selling this particular motor vehicle, suppose we're talking about the motor vehicle, correct? Now, this particular company A is suppose Maruti. Now, this Maruti has sold Maruti car to Mr. B and Mr. B has in turn made the payment. So, this particular activity of company A is in course or furtherance of business. It is in course of business only. Uska काम ही वही है, right? So, that is what is happening in that is what is the meaning of supply. And so, that is fulfilling all the conditions, right? That means goods to hai. Then only we came to the concept of supply. So, car is the goods. Then we saw that this particular activity, right है, activity is fulfilled, activity condition fulfilled है, sale हो रहा है, then this is a business transaction, yes, and whether consideration has been received. So we have to see A, B, C. If the activity is as per the sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease, disposal, that is okay, checklist. Then whether it is for business or in course of business or furtherance of business, that also we have to see, that is done. And whether it is for consideration or not, that we also have to see. If all the three conditions are fulfilled, then it falls into the scope of supply. Clear everybody? Now, what do you mean by transfer? I'm transferring certain rights to you, right? So this is particularly a land I have. On this, I have got the transfer of development rights from the government. Now, how do you get this transfer of development rights? Suppose this is the land. Now, this particular land, the government has taken. The government has acquired this land. Why? Because they want to widen the roads. So, what do the government say? They give me some rights. That is, they gave me, okay, Ankit, I have acquired this land of yours. So what you can do is basically, I'll give you some rights which you can sell in the market, right? So whenever a builder wants to build something over here, you can pass on the transfer of development rights to him. So I'm transferring certain things, correct? So here what we're talking about is transfer of both goods and services, right? So transfer can be of goods, services, anything, right? So that is what we mean by the transfer. Sale का मतलब समझ गए, transfer भी मैंने समझ गया, right? Barter. Now, what do you mean by barter? Now, suppose barter means what? I am giving you some say CA services and the client in turn is giving me supply of grocery. Suppose the client is a grocery supplier, the client is a grocery say atta manufacturer and he is my client. I am giving services in the form of CA services. He is supplying me what? In the form of his goods what he produced. That is called as barter, correct? Exchange का मतलब क्या हो गया? Now, what do you mean by exchange? I go to mobile shop. I tell him that I want to buy this Apple का phone. This person says, okay, this is costing 1 lakh rupees. What I'm doing is, I'm giving in say old phone and I'm making the payment of 80,000 rupees, correct? This particular activity is called exchange activity, correct? So what is included in this? A is included, activity hai, right? Exchange ka activity hai, business ke liye hai, this particular person is mobile shop, that is his business. And C, what is C? Consideration is there. So if it is fulfilling all three activities A, B, C, then we say that it falls under the scope of supply. Clear everybody? So what we've understood is sale का मतलब क्या है, ट्रांसफर का मतलब क्या है, barter means what, exchange means what, correct? Similarly, what do you mean by licensing or rental or leasing, correct? So there are a lot of options where you see that there's a company which creates softwares. Now, they charge you licensing fees, they charge you rental basis, they charge you on lease basis, right? So these are nothing but they are basically activities what they are doing, right? On what, goods and services or both, right? So that is also included in the definition of supply if provided A, B, C is fulfilled. If this activity is included in these activities, if it is for the business consideration, business or course of business, furtherance of business, and consideration is there for not. If all these three things are fulfilled, then this is included in the scope of supply. Clear everybody? Now, important point to understand here is disposal. What do you mean by disposal here? Now, suppose if I have certain goods, I am disposing that goods. Disposing का मतलब क्या हो गया? This pen, suppose this pen is not further usable to me, then I am disposing that particular goods, correct? Now, this disposing of this particular goods, if it is in the course of business or furtherance of business and for a consideration, suppose there's a second-hand buyer for this particular pen, that means I'm disposing of this pen as a scrap to the second-hand buyer and is giving me some consideration, that will be included in this particular concept of disposal. That means disposal for consideration. Clear everybody? Just give me a break. I hope this is clear to you guys. So what we are trying to understand in section 7.1a is all forms, that means all activities, that means all kind of adjectives, all kind of doing work, all kind of activities on goods and services or both made or agreed to be made, that means जिसको मैंने सामने सामने ट्रेड कर लिया या फिर I have taken advance and I am going to provide that activities later on, that means advance received will also be considered in the scope of supply, correct? In the course of, that means it is my routine business, right? That means it is my routine business or furtherance of my business, that is any kind of promotion activity, expansion activity, right? That for business is going to be classified in the scope of supply. Now suppose motor car का हम बात करते हैं, we'll take one example of gold jewelry. First let's discuss on the gold jewelry aspect, right? So here there's a Mr. A, Mrs. A, right? Mrs. A is there, she goes to a jeweler and she sells her jewelry worth say 50 lakh rupees. This jeweler in turn makes her the payment of 50 lakh rupees. Right? So is a activity is there, right? Activity is there. There's a transfer, there's a sale, right? The sale is happening here. Sale of jewelry is happening by Mrs. A to the jeweler. So activity condition is fulfilled. Whether consideration is there, yes, consideration is also there, right? But whether this particular activity, is it an activity of business for Mrs. A? No, this is not an activity of Mrs. A. Mrs. A will, why she will sell jewelry? In general, she will sell jewelry when she wants to either make a new jewelry or she is in need of money, correct? So here Mrs. A is not in the business of jewelry trading, and hence this particular sale by Mrs. A to the jeweler will not be considered in the scope of supply. Clear everybody? Now suppose if Mrs. A, she is running a shop of jewelry, a gold jewelry, and then she is selling this to jeweler, then this particular activity will be called as your supply. Why? Because in the course or furtherance of the business. I hope this is clear to you guys. Is it clear? Similarly, we'll look into the opposite aspect. This is a jeweler shop. This jeweler shop is selling goods to Mrs. A for 50 lakh rupees. So Mrs. A is giving this money consideration of 50 lakh rupees. Now this consideration can be in any form. Either it can be in the money, it can be it can be kind form also, correct? So this Mrs. A is giving what, 50 lakhs rupees. So out of that 50 lakh rupees, she is giving some biscuits, gold biscuits, and some portion is in the form of cash, correct? So that means what is happening is that there's a consideration. There's a jeweler who is selling this gold jewelry. So let us do ABC analysis. A, is it an activity happening? Yes, sale is happening. Whether it is for business? Yes, it is the jewelry business of the jeweler. Yes, business condition is fulfilled. Whether it is for consideration? Yes, consideration is also fulfilled. So all these three ABC conditions are fulfilled, and because of which it will fall into the scope of supply. In the previous example, when we reverse the situation, when Mrs. A was selling jewelry to this jeweler, the Mrs. A was not into the business of jewelry and it did not fulfill the condition of ABC analysis, and therefore that activity was outside the scope of supply. Clear to you guys? Is it clear to you guys? Now, similarly for motor cars, let us look into one example of motor cars, right? I am an individual. I have, suppose my wife, she's an individual, she's not doing any work. Now my wife now wants to change her car. So she goes to the old car dealer and she sells this car to him. And for this, the old car dealer will give her the money. Correct? So there is a sale happening, and there's also what? Money consideration happening. But whether this particular activity is business for Mrs. B? No. Clear? So it will not form into the scope of business. Similarly, now I am Ankit. I write my name with double A, right? So I come first in the phone book, very important. So I am Ankit and I am selling my car, which is in my company's name or which is in the proprietor's name, but still it is used for the business. This car has become old, or then I am selling this car to the scrap dealer. This scrap dealer is giving me money in term consideration, say 5 lakh rupees. So all the three conditions ABC analysis are fulfilled. Activity is happening, sale, business के लिए course of business है, right? That has been used for business only, and there's a consideration also. So this activity will be considered in the scope of supply. Clear everybody? I hope this concept of scope of supply is clear to you guys. Clear everybody? So once again, let us quickly recap what we have understood in this particular chart. So what we have understood in this particular chart is that Section 7.1 is an inclusive definition. It talks about activities to be considered as supply. Which all activities will be considered as supply for which you have received the consideration, and if those activities are in the nature of sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease or disposal, correct? So if any of the activities is happening for which you have received the consideration, that can be for goods and services or both, made or agreed to be made, right? That means this activity can either be made instantly or agreed to be made, right? In the course or furtherance of business, then only that will be included in the scope of supply. Otherwise, it is not included in the scope of supply. Is it clear to you guys? Correct everybody? Right? So now let us go and see another aspect of the scope of supply, where it states that activities to be considered as supply if for consideration and you are doing what? Import of services. यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा था? You are doing what activities? Sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease, disposal. But import was not included. Importing was not included. So they have specifically made one subsection 7.1b where it talks about the import of services. Why not goods? Import of goods are covered under the Customs Act. Clear everybody? So here what we see in GST is only import of services, correct? So 7.1b talks about import of goods, import of services. Import of goods is covered under the Customs Act. Is it clear to you guys? Are you guys able to understand the logic? Why each and every words have been framed, correct? So 7.1b speaks about import of services, right? Why import of services only and not goods? Because import of goods is covered under the Customs Act, right? Logical, very pure common sense, correct? Now let us see 7.1b what it says. So activity here is import of services. Now what do you mean import of services? This import of services can be either for business or for non-business. Now, what do you mean by this import of services? Let us go and understand that what do you mean by import of services. Now, you are in India, right? So, and you have an office in Bombay. I went onto the net. I saw that there is a website called freelancer.com where we have a lot of freelancers working. So I identified one freelancer and I told them that please make a website for me. Not website, please prepare an interior design for me for my office, correct? So what is happening here is that, and this particular person will transfer these files to me and I am going to make the payment to this guy, correct? So whether this particular activity is for business or for non-business, that is not the concern here, right? That means whether this interior designing का जो design है, whether I am taking the design for my office purpose or for my residential purpose, the government is not concerned for that. What it's stating is that अगर आपने कोई import of service किया, राइट है, तो वो फॉरेनर को पैसा मिलने वाला है, करेक्ट? सो वी आई शुड ऑल्सो गेट द मनी इन दिस पर्टिकुलर एक्टिविटी. सो एज एन रिसिपिएंट ऑफ द सर्विस you will have to make the payment of taxes on a reverse charge basis. We will see this once we'll cover with the reverse charge mechanism also, but just to give you a glimpse ki what is there under section 7(1)(b). So here we are just touching upon 7(1)(b). We have a lot to cover while we move further in this particular series, correct? So 7(1)(b) talks about import of services. These can be either for business or for non-business. Both are covered in this 7(1)(b). Clear everybody? So what do you mean by business? That can be, here what you say is that, see here what you saw is that this is India. So here I am a recipient, here is an interior designer, right? What is happening is that, so location of supply is where? Outside India. Location of recipient is where? In India. And place of supply is where? We will see the place of supply once we read the place of supply concept, but as of now you just understand, because the recipient is in India, so place of supply is also in India. Correct? If both two things are in India, that means the recipient is in India and place of supply is also in India, and the service provider is outside India, then this particular transaction is called as business transaction. And if it is for the business purpose, it is called as it will be classified under the import of services, right? And you're making the payment for in consideration also, correct? It can be for non-business purpose also, right? We have seen the non-business purpose also. That means interior designing from abroad. So taxable in the hands of recipient, that is the importer. So in case of import of services, the taxability is in the hands of the recipient, that is importer will have to make the payment of the RCM, correct everybody, under the reverse charge mechanism, correct everybody. So we are just trying to link each and every aspect of this particular section 7(1)(a) when we are dealing with the concept of scope of supply. So now we know that first we have identified that this particular activity is called as goods or services or not. This particular product, whether it will be called as goods or services. So what we saw for goods, whether it is movable or not. If it is movable, yes, it is in the definition of goods. We saw that goods and we saw definition and we found out that it is not money and it is not securities, so it is goods, right? So then we concluded that goods is there. Then we saw that whether the taxable event of supply is happening or not, correct? So suppose tomorrow some client comes to your office and say, I want to sell this particular pen, I want to sell my trainings. So what you will have to identify, you will have to start checking whether that particular activity or whether that particular thing is goods or services, whether it fulfills the criteria of goods and services. Once it fulfills the criteria of goods and services, then you will see that what activities happen on this goods and services, right? Suppose if I just record the lecture and I don't give the lecture, right? So if I'm not giving the lecture, I'm just recording the lecture and keeping it with myself, then whether this activity, any activity is happening on that particular service? No. That means what activity has happened, that also you have to see. If those activities, what is happening is mentioned as per section 7(1)(a) and it is for consideration, then you say it is under the scope of supply. Then you say that it is under scope of supply, correct? And you will also see that this activity should be in the course or furtherance of business, correct? Then we saw that there are certain people who are importing certain goods and services. For import of goods, we have Customs Act. For import of services, whether it is for business purpose or for non-business purpose, the government is not concerned. If it is an import of service, that means that particular concept will be covered under the scope of supply, correct? Now, suppose as an individual, I am a small person and I am just giving an outsourcing work to somebody to design something for me. Suppose if I am giving somebody to design my cover page of my book and I am giving it to some foreigner. So now what is happening in this scenario? I am a small taxpayer. So will I have to make the payment in the RCM or not? So for this, we will see what we're trying to understand is not the taxability, we are just trying to understand the scope of the supply, correct? So yes, scope of supply के अंदर आएगा, but whether it is taxable supply, whether the recipient or the service provider, whether they are the big business houses or small business houses, remember the first chapter what we saw, that we talk about that the levy होगा on goods and services, and collection and payment, that will be depending upon the category of the taxpayer, correct है? Whether the taxpayer is a big assessee or a small assessee, depending upon that there will be collection and payment of the taxes. Clear everybody? So what we're just trying to understand here is just the scope of the wide scope of this particular what do you say section number 7.1, that means supply के अंदर क्या क्या चीजें आएंगी. Clear? I hope it is clear to you guys. If you want to copy this chart, you guys can copy this chart. I'll give you 2 minutes. Please copy this chart quickly. Okay, you guys can pause and copy this later also, no problem. Now, what we have understood till now is that section 7.1 speaks about what? Section 7.1 speaks about the inclusion, right? So under inclusion, first we saw that if the activity is for consideration, then what will be included? Now we will see that there can be an activity which is without consideration also. So that activity, will that also be included in the definition scope of supply or not, correct? Suppose I am giving free lectures. So will this be classified as what? Scope of supply? Correct? So that is what we are going to identify now. So without consideration. What do you mean without consideration? That is no monetary involvement into this, correct hai? So if it is without consideration, what do you mean by without consideration? 7.1c. So हमने पहला क्या देखा? 7.1a. 7.1a spoke about all the domestic transactions. 7.1b spoke about import, specifically import of services and not import of goods. Why? Import of goods is covered under what? Under customs, correct? Now we will see certain activities where is no consideration, that is given in section 7.1c, activities which are specified in the schedule number 1. So एक schedule बना दिया है, under that schedule there are certain activities mentioned. If your transaction or your activity or your objective or your doing of goods and services are falling in those particular schedule, and for which you are not charging any consideration, then also it will fall under the scope of supply, is what we are trying to understand, correct? So let us go and understand this now. 1 second. Okay, so under this 7.1c we will see that there are 4 paras, right? Para 1, para 2, para 3, para 4. So permanent transfer. So first is talking about the permanent transfer. Second is talking about supply between. Third is talking about supply between. And fourth is talking about import of services, right? So what we are trying to understand here is that there is certain permanent transfer. Second is also supply. Third is talking about supply, and fourth is talking about import of services. So you can see import of services, then you can see transfer. Transfer हमने कहाँ देखा था? Transfer हमने यहाँ पे देखा था. Then we saw supply है. Supply is all the thing activities, correct है? That means anything which is falling in this is called as supply only, correct? So what we are trying to understand here is that first part is talking specifically on transfer. Transfer जो यहाँ पे दिया गया है, if it is for without consideration, then whether it will be falling under the scope of supply or not is what we have to see. So with consideration, if there is any transfer, I know it is falling under scope of supply. But if there is certain transfer and if it is happening without consideration, will that also be classified as supply or not is what we have to understand, correct? So here act of transfer, 1 second. So let me just expand this. Okay, now permanent transfer of business assets. If there's a permanent transfer of business asset. Now, when I talk about permanent transfer, this transfer can happen in 2 situations. When look upon the activities हमको पता है क्या क्या, सेल है, ट्रांसफर है, बार्टर है, एक्सचेंज है, लाइसेंस है, रेंटल है, लीज है, डिस्पोजल है. ये खाली ये कितने 8 ही एक्टिविटीज हैं which can happen to a particular goods or services, and it is just an inclusive definition. There can be another activities also, right? So because it is just a inclusive definition, correct? So out of this permanent transfer, तो transfer कौन से situation के अंदर होगा? It can be either transfer or it can be either disposal, correct है? Then only you say it is transfer, correct? So act of transfer and disposal only. No other activity will be considered in this particular scenario. That means even donation will be considered. The donation can be one of the activity, right? It is not mentioned in these activities, but this being an inclusive definition, we come to a situation where I'm donating something without consideration. So this donation is basically permanent transfer of my business asset, correct? I am donating something from my business. That means this is particularly called as an activity, but these activities not mentioned in this list. So whether this will be included or not, so that is why we have to understand this is an inclusive definition, and any activities other than this can also form part of the activities. Clear? I hope you guys are understanding the nitty-gritty of this particular section, correct? Now, what do you mean by business asset, right? So there's a permanent transfer. I am permanently transferring. मैं परमानेंटली डिस्पोज कर रहा हूं, मैं परमानेंटली डोनेट कर रहा हूं, मैं परमानेंटली किसी चीज को ट्रांसफर कर रहा हूं ऑफ व्हाट बिजनेस एसेट. Now, when I talk about business asset, it can be my capital asset, capital goods, it can be my current asset, it can be my stock, it can be my unexpired right. Suppose if I'm holding a franchisee of say some franchisee of some store, and that franchisee fees I have paid for say 1 year, but I cannot continue the work for I continue the work for say 3 months, and next 9 months I can transfer that right to somebody else, right? So this license is my right, this right is my asset, right? Or my stock which I am holding, that is also my stock, that is also my asset. So any kind of business asset. So here it is not restricting that it should be capital asset, it should be current asset, it should be stock, it should be rights, whatever is your asset of a business asset. If there's a permanent transfer of business asset, right? If there's a permanent transfer of business asset and it is for without consideration and on which ITC has been availed on such asset. Very important to note here is that if you are transferring certain goods on which you have availed the ITC and this transfer is happening without consideration, then that particular activity will be called as your supply. Now let us go and understand what do you mean by this particular thing of ITC availed on such asset. Very, very, very important. So please concentrate. Please take a deep breath. Please concentrate here. This is very important for you guys to understand, right? Because there will be a lot of scenarios. You will see that this particular transaction is without consideration. So whether this will fall under the concept of supply or not, for this, what is you have to analyze is whether this permanent transfer of business asset on which ITC has been availed on such asset. Now, what do you mean by ITC has been availed? So let us take an example now. Okay, this is my office. Right, I am buying certain, say I am buying calculators. Correct, I am buying calculators worth say 1 lakh rupees. On this 1 lakh rupees, say suppose there is 10,000 rupees as GST. Now I am selling these goods, right? I am doing a sale activity for a consideration, right? If I am doing this sale activity for a consideration, I am selling this calculator for say 2 lakh rupees and I am getting what 20,000 rupees as GST. So while making the payment to the government, what I'll say, I have collected 20,000 rupees as GST. I have already paid 10,000 rupees as GST to you, and the balance what is left is 10,000 rupees, right? That means I have taken the ITC of the inputs, ITC of my purchases, input tax credit of my purchases, right? So if the government is allowing you to take this particular this thing ITC, government is expecting that you are into the business, you are taking the ITC, you are not the end consumer. So that means you'll be selling the goods for value addition, and when you'll be doing value addition, government will be getting more revenue out of it. So government is eyeing this extra revenue. That is why they're allowing you ITC. We have seen the seamless flow of credit, the concept under the first chapter, correct? That is what we are trying to understand here. Linking here is that why ITC availed wale goods ko hi hum consider karenge and not of this particular thing, correct? So now let us quickly see once again. I'll give you one more example so it will get more clear to you guys, correct? This is my office. I am buying calculators. This calculator I am buying worth 1 lakh rupees and 10,000 is the GST. I'm selling this now. Suppose if I'm not selling these calculators, correct? Now I'm not selling these calculators and I am transferring these calculators. or I am disposing of these calculators, or I am donating these calculators, right? Or if I am giving it for free of cost to my friend, right? That means I am not charging any consideration. Now, what is happening in this scenario? I have taken the ITC on these goods, but the government is not getting any value addition, correct? So the government says what? If this particular activity for which you are not getting consideration, then it is not falling under the scope of supply. Then if it is not falling under scope of supply, you cannot even take the ITC. But if you have taken the ITC on this particular goods and then you are supplying it free of cost, the government says, boss, I am not getting a value addition, therefore this particular transaction will be classified as supply, and this supply ka jo value hoga, that will be as per the valuation rules. Clear everybody? Are you guys able to understand, relate here? That means what the government is wanting is that government का idea क्या है? Government is expecting certain value addition, certain more revenue from you guys, correct? Now, if that particular stock you have sold it without any further government to benefit to the government, right? You have transferred it without any consideration. जब consideration मैंने दिया ही नहीं है, the government will say, because there is no consideration, I am not getting revenue. So if I am not getting revenue, I should get revenue from whom? I should get revenue from the previous transaction, right? Government will not leave the revenue. So government will say, I should get the revenue from the previous transaction. So henceforth, you are not eligible to take the ITC. If you have availed the ITC, then that particular transaction will be classified as supply, and on that supply, we will be valuing that supply, and on that we will have to make the payment of GST. Is it clear to you guys? Are you guys able to understand? Permanent transfer of business asset. These business asset can be either capital asset, current asset, stock, unexpired right, any kind of business asset, right? On which the ITC has been availed. ITC availed का मतलब क्या हो गया? That means you are not the end consumer. And if you are not the end consumer, government wants the revenue from whom? The end consumer. अब जब मैंने goods को free में बांट दिया, the end consumer is not paying anything to you. You are not making the payment to the government. Then where will the government get the revenue from? So therefore, the government says that if you have availed the ITC and if you have sold the goods without consideration, you have to value those goods, and on that valuation you have to make the payment of GST, correct? And if you are saying that it is not you are saying that I will not value this good, then you cannot avail the ITC on that particular asset. Clear everybody? Now let us see the importance of the term such asset. Now suppose I am buying certain raw material. Suppose if I am buying cloth, correct? I am buying cloth. On this, I have made purchases of 1 lakh rupees, and on this 1 lakh rupees, suppose I have made the payment of 10,000 as GST, correct? Now, this cloth, I have done certain activity in my factory, I have converted into shirts. Now, these shirts, if I am disposing it off without consideration, right, then will this transaction be called as supply? This transaction will not be called as supply. Why? Because the ITC which I have availed is on the cloth and not on the shirt. That means the asset should be the same, correct? Very important to understand here is that the asset should be the same. जो जिसका मैं input ले रहा हूँ, अगर वही चीज free में जा रही है, then only basically the ITC is not, you cannot avail the ITC. Or if you are availing the ITC, then you will fall under the definition of supply. If you say that I have not availed the ITC, then it is not falling into the scope of supply, correct? So the choice has been given. Basically, we'll study in detail in the next session. अगर आपने कोई goods को free में निकाला, right? A transfer of the business asset without consideration, and you have not basically availed the ITC, then it is okay. If you have availed the ITC, then it falls under the concept of supply, and on that supply you will be valuing that supply and as per the valuation rules, and then you will have to make the payment of your GST. Clear everybody? I hope this is clear to you guys. Very important. Clear? I'll quickly recap this once I finish this session once again, right? So just hold on if you are finding anything difficult here. Now, second para 2 states what? Now, what do you mean by para 2 of section 7.1c? So what we are understanding here is section 7.1c. That means what is 7.1c talking about? Activity specified in schedule number 1 for which there is no consideration, still it will be considered in the definition of supply, correct? So that means transaction, that is an activity of supply between whom? Activity of supply between any kind of related person, any kind of distinct person, and there's an exception also. Now what do you mean by related person? Related person का मतलब क्या हो गया? Shareholders हैं. That means there's one company A. There's one company A who is holding shares in company B, who is holding share in company C. Correct? They are holding 25% or greater or equal to 25% in both the companies. Correct? So because they have one holding company or one parent company which is holding more than 25% of shares, therefore B and C becomes a related party. So if there is any transaction between B and C happening and that is without consideration, then also it will be considered in the definition of supply. Correct? We are not talking about the taxability right now. We are just trying to understand the concept of supply right now. Correct? So that is what we have to understand here is that कि वो goods और services है और उसको supply के definition में भी डाल दिया गया है, even if the transaction is without the consideration. Now what do you mean by control? Related party का मतलब क्या होगा? We're just trying to understand the concept of related party. Controls means what? That means if company A is holding more than 51% as per the Income Tax Act, this control has not been defined in the GST Act, but we're just taking the generic income tax का understanding where it state control कैसा आएगा? If company A is holding certain 51% or more in company B, and there's a transaction between company A and company B, then what is happening is that if it is without consideration, then that particular transaction will also be considered as what? Will also be considered as what? Under the scope of supply. Then you have ownership, right? Ownership का मतलब क्या हो गया? Ownership means what? कंपनी A and कंपनी B. कंपनी A का पर्सन यहाँ पे डायरेक्टर है, कंपनी B का पर्सन यहाँ पे ऑफिसर है. प्लीज मेक द करेक्शन, इट इज नॉट द ओनरशिप, इट इज ऑफिसर्स. Correct? That means company A, once again I'll correct it right now, officer. Right? So officer, right? That means one person of company A and is an officer in one of the office, and the person from company B is officer in company A. That means they become the related party. Any transaction happening between A and B without consideration, that will be falling under scope of supply. Partners are nothing but the related parties. Employer-employee is again related parties. Correct? Family members are also called as related parties, right? Now, suppose if I'm into the business of, say, I have a toy shop, right? Now, I have a toy shop. My son comes and take the toys free of cost, right? So whether this particular activity will be classified under supply or not, yes, it will be classified under supply. Why? Because this supply is between the related parties, that is with the family, and it is for without consideration. Still it will be included in the concept of supply. Correct? Are you guys understanding the importance of this particular concept? So what we're trying to understand here is that supply between related parties, that can be shareholders, controls, officers, partners, employee, or family member. Now what do you mean family? Family has been divided into two parts. Now whether this family, मतलब जो मेरे direct family, that is my spouse and my children's, correct? My spouse and my children, whether they're dependent or independent, that is not the concern. They will be falling under definition of supply. Other than those, that means my parents, my grandparents, my brother, my sister, if they are dependent, then only they will be classified as related party. Now suppose it's my brother, he is earning separately, and if he is coming to my store and he is buying certain goods without any consideration, then that will not fall within this scope. Correct, everybody? Is it clear? That will fall under the scope of permanent transfer of business asset without consideration. Correct? That will fall under para number 1 and not under para number 2. Is it clear to you guys? Are you guys understanding the linkage? Right? Now, sole agent will also be basically part of your related party only. Sole agent का मतलब क्या होता है? I have appointed one particular person who is going to do the dealing for me, or who is going to be the sole agent, whether I am going to buy the goods or I am going to sell the goods. Clear, everybody? Is it clear to you guys? Now, next is the concept of distinct person, right? That means what we have covered till now under without consideration is that under without consideration we have seen permanent transfer of business asset. Business asset can be either capital asset, stock, unexpired good, any kind of asset. There is no restriction, and on which ITC has been availed, then that will fall under the scope of supply. Second, we saw that supply activity is what? Supply between what? Related person. That means if there's supply without consideration and with related person, then also they will be called under the definition of scope, fall under the scope of supply. Correct? Related person के अंदर हमने देखा shareholders, controls, officers, partners, employees, family का मतलब क्या हो गया? Spouse and children. They will be called as family irrespective whether dependent or independent. Whereas parents, grandparents, brothers and sisters are concerned, they will be called as dependent. Only if they are dependent, they will be called as relative. Otherwise, they will not be called as relative. Clear? Sole agent, they will be called as my related party. Correct? Is it clear to you guys? Now we are seeing para number 2 के अंदर supply between the distinct person. Very important concept under GST. Section 25 speaks about the distinct person. We have heard the concept of split personality. मेरे दो रूप हैं, एक ऐसा दिखता हूँ, ऐसा दिखता हूँ. One I am angry and one I am not angry. Correct? Similarly, you have the concept of distinct personalities, right? Distinct persons, right? If there's a transaction between this person and this person, I am the same person, but I am holding two entities, right? Entity number A and entity number B, and these entities have separate GST number. In the eyes of the law, this is separate entity and this is separate entity. If there's any transaction happening, supply happening, any kind of activity happening between entity A and entity B, they will be called as supply even if it is without consideration. Correct? So in the eyes of the law, distinct person having different GST number, they are called as distinct person, right? And that will be called as the distinct person, and those transaction between company A and company B under my PAN number will be called as distinct person. Correct? So let us go and see this also in detail so you guys can understand more in detail. Now, one PAN and two different registration. Now, मेरा एक ही PAN number है. My company is ABC Limited. Now, this ABC Limited has one branch in Mumbai, one branch in Pune, one branch in Delhi, one branch in Karnataka, one branch in Andhra Pradesh. So every state I will have to take different registration number. Even in Maharashtra, I am taking two different registration number, right? So what is happening is that under one PAN number, I can take multiple registration, two or different registrations, correct? And if there is stock transfer between this branch to this branch, 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 or vice versa, then that transaction, if it is happening without consideration, that will also be classified as my supply. Now, whenever we are talking about without consideration, we need to remember one thing. This without consideration is falling under scope of supply. अब सप्लाई के अंदर आ गया है, दैट मीन्स जीएसटी विल बी लेविड. नाउ जीएसटी विल बी लेविड एट व्हाट वैल्यू, बिकॉज का कोई कंसिडरेशन ही नहीं है. फॉर दैट वी विल सी द वैल्यूएशन रूल एंड देन वी विल सी दैट सपोज दिस ट्रांजैक्शन का वैल्यू एज पर वैल्यूएशन रूल इज कमिंग 1 लाख रुपीज. ऑन दैट 1 लाख रुपीज यू विल हैव टू मेक द पेमेंट ऑफ जीएसटी. करेक्ट? सो एज ऑफ नाउ जस्ट कंसिडर दैट दिस इज विदाउट कंसिडरेशन एंड द वैल्यू विल बी डिफाइंड एज पर द वैल्यूएशन रूल्स, एंड ऑन दैट बेसिस द जीएसटी विल बी लेविड. क्लियर एवरीबडी? Is it clear to you guys? So what we're trying to understand here is that without consideration, if there's any activity which is in the form of sale, transfer, barter, exchange, any kind of activity, and it is of the stock, then that is one PAN and two or more different registrations. That means it can be either stock transfer of new or used capital asset. Very important. Suppose if I have been transferred from Bombay office to Delhi office and I'm taking my laptop along with me. So along with the person, even the assets are getting moved from Bombay to Delhi. Those will also be considered as distinct person transaction और उसके ऊपर आपको valuation निकालना पड़ेगा. Clear everybody? This concept of bill to ship to transaction, we'll be understanding this once we go in detail about the bill to ship to transaction. Correct? These are the transaction what we're talking about, the distinct persons. Correct? That means the transaction is happening under the same entity, under the same PAN, but two different registrations of GST. अगर दो different registrations of GST है, तो GST के आंख में क्या हो गया? There are two separate entities, and because there are two separate entities, this will be classified as a distinct person. And this is how you say that if the distinct person is there, transaction is happening with distinct person. If it's without consideration, we will have to find out the valuation for valuation rule, and then we will say it is under, it falls under scope of supply. Clear everybody? Very simple, very logical है कि नहीं है? Correct है? Whether this particular thing is logical or not, डिस्टिंक्ट पर्सन का, वी विल सी द लॉजिक्स बिहाइंड दिस एंड द वैल्यूएशन रूल कि कैसे बोथ द कंपनीज कैन बी benefited out of it, right? It is not charging double taxes, but yes, because of the GST, the seamless flow of credit. So suppose one branch is making the payment of GST, but they can still take the ITC of that particular supply, correct? So it is seamless flow of credit, right? So it is just the blockage of working capital, but it is not adding to my cost. Clear, everybody? We have known this concept of seamless flow of credit, correct? Now there's one exception when they supply between related party and transaction related party. What is an exception? Let us go and see that exception also. Gift to employees up to 50,000 rupees. We have seen that employees are my what? Related parties, correct? Now if I as an employer, I am giving certain gift to my employee up to rupees 50,000, that is exempted, but over and above 50,000 rupees, that will fall under the scope of supply, correct है? That means up to 50,000 rupees अगर मैंने कोई गिफ्ट दिया मेरे एम्प्लॉय को, that will not fall under the scope of supply. Now this 50,000 is what? 50,000 rupees is per employee, per annum, per employee, correct है? So how many employees do I have? For each employee 50,000 rupees का limit is there, correct? 50,000 rupees per annum per employee is the basically the limit which will not fall under the concept of supply, correct? Suppose if I am giving certain cell phones to my staff, if this cell phone is below 50,000 rupees, then they will not fall under scope of supply. If this cell phone is above 50,000 rupees, then they will fall under scope of supply. So what should an employee do? Smart employee should say, sir, if you want to give me something more than 50,000 rupees, you give me cash or you give me money and I am going to buy the goods, right? So money is neither good nor services, right? So उसपे GST आएगा ही नहीं, just off the record. So this is what a smart employee should tell the employer, correct, everybody? So exception is what? If I'm giving certain things as a gift to my staff, right, to my employee, and the value of that goods is less than 50,000 rupees, then they will not fall under the scope of supply. Is it clear to you guys? If it is above 50,000 rupees, then it will fall under scope of supply. Clear to you guys? Is it clear? Right? So what we have covered till now is 7.1c, activity specified schedule number 1, permanent transfer of business asset. Then we saw that's one kind of activity, permanent transfer. Then we saw second activity, supply between related party or distinct person. Then para number 3 speaks about supply between what? Supply between what? I think we should end the topic here today. Tomorrow we will see the other aspects of this, because this is very heavy and you'll not be able to digest it continuously. So let us stop here, and tomorrow we'll go on to another aspects of section 7. This section 7 is going to be something which you are going to remember lifetime. So please concentrate. Once you understand the logics and once you understand the concepts behind this, you will feel it very beautiful, the flow of GST, correct, everybody? So thank you for the patient hearing. We'll again quickly recap tomorrow what we have done today. So quickly watch the video, you will understand what we have done today, and then we will move further under decoding the supply. So this decoding of supply will be there for 2-3 more sessions, so that this concept of supply gets stuck into head very minutely. Why? Because the taxable event under GST is what? Supply. So you should know the concept of supply very well. It is the backbone of GST. Clear, everybody? So take care. Have a great time. Good night. Study well. Tata. Bye bye. See you.